Poor black man buys a homeless girl dinner. What follows brings everyone to tears. The night was bone-deep cold, the kind that bites through layers and settles in your soul. And yet, there he was, Leroy, 68, coat frayed, hands cracked, with only $4 to his name and a heart still too full for this world. He shuffled out of the shelter's gate as they closed it for the night. They always ran out of room, early priority to mothers with babies, veterans, anyone younger than him. Leroy didn't mind. Not anymore. He had the streets. He had his rhythm. What he didn't expect was to find someone smaller, thinner, and colder than himself huddled behind the corner trash bin by Marley's diner. She couldn't have been more than 12. Skin pale as a ghost. Bare feet blue against the concrete. She flinched when he approached like a feral cat that forgot what kindness looked like. "You eatin' tonight, baby girl?" His voice was gravel laced with warmth. She didn't answer, just tightened her arms around her knees, eyes wide and scared. That silent sight told him everything. She hadn't eaten, probably not in days. Leroy didn't pause. He walked into Marley's, the bells above the door jingling a soft, tired tune. The waitress, Carla, looked up and her smile faded when she saw him. He knew that look. Pity. Worry. But she always gave him a cup of coffee and let him sit for a bit. Tonight, he pushed 2 crumpled bills across the counter. "Can I get 2 grilled cheese sandwiches to go? No soup, just the sandwiches." Leroy, Carla frowned. "That's all you got, isn't it?" He nodded. "She's just a baby out there. Can't let her sleep hungry." A few minutes later, he stepped back out into the cold with a steaming paper bag and coffee for himself. He didn't see the girl at first. Panic shot through him. Then movement. She was curled even tighter, trying to disappear into the wall. He crouched slowly and laid the bag beside her. "It's warm. I ain't gonna touch you. Just thought maybe you could eat." No reply. But when he stood and began to walk away, he heard the faintest crinkle of paper. The bag had moved. She was eating. Leroy smiled and kept walking. He didn't expect anything. Didn't want thanks. He'd done what he could. That was enough. But it wasn't the end. The next night, she was there again. This time, she wasn't hiding. She stood up when she saw him, nervous, still, but waiting. Leroy blinked. A part of him hoped she'd been taken in, helped. But another part deeper, more honest, was glad to see she was alive. "I like the sandwich," she mumbled. He nodded slowly. "What's your name, baby girl?" "Emma." "Well, Emma, you hungry again?" She didn't say yes, but her stomach did, loud enough for both of them. And this time, Carla gave them extra fries. "On the house," she said with a wink. They sat on the curb together, eating in silence. She was still a stranger, but a little less broken now. Her eyes darted less. Her hands trembled a bit less. And Leroy, for the first time in a long time, felt like he mattered again. The third night, Emma wasn't at the corner. Leroy waited. An hour passed. Then another. Panic curled in his chest. He checked the alley. Nothing. Behind the diner. Nothing. His steps got quicker, his breath shorter. Not again. He'd seen too many disappear into drugs, into silence, into nowhere. Then, just when he was about to give up, he saw her. Sitting outside the library, clutching a tattered children's book. "I thought maybe you weren't coming," she said. He knelt down. "I'd never leave you hungry, Emma." That night, she told him her story. Her mother had died 2 years back. Overdose. Her stepfather no better. She ran. Lived in alleys, shelters when she could sneak in, stole food when she had to. But mostly, she went hungry. She trusted no one. Until Leroy. She cried that night, silent tears that soaked her sleeves. And Leroy didn't try to fix it. He just sat beside her, the way he wished someone had sat beside him when his own wife died, 20 years ago, and the drinking started, and the house was lost, and the friends vanished. Sometimes, healing comes in quiet moments. In sandwiches shared on curbs. In 2 broken people sitting side by side in the cold. By the end of the week, the diner knew them both by name. Leroy and Emma, Carla would say, are nightly regulars. People started noticing. A few offered jackets. One woman dropped off a backpack with clean socks and a toothbrush for Emma. An old man left $50 on the counter and said, "For the girl." God bless them both. Leroy didn't understand it at first. Why people were suddenly paying attention. All he did was share a sandwich. But it spread. One act of kindness, captured on a passerby's phone, made its way to social media. A video of Leroy handing that first bag of food to a trembling Emma. The caption, He had nothing, but he gave her everything. It exploded. But Leroy didn't care about cameras or fame. All he wanted was for Emma to stay safe, stay warm, stay fed. And if he could be the reason for that even just for a while, then his life had not been wasted. The video spread like wildfire, but Leroy didn't have a phone, didn't know about the internet. It was Carla who told him. "Leroy," she said one morning, eyes wide with excitement as he shuffled in with Emma beside him. "You're viral." He blinked. "Viral? I ain't sick." No, she laughed. "It means people saw what you did. All over the world. They're talking about you, calling you a hero." Leroy waved her off, embarrassed. "I ain't no hero. Just fed a hungry child." But it was too late for modesty. A local news crew came, then a national one. Then a charity reached out. They wanted to help Leroy and Emma both. Shelter, clothes, food, even schooling for Emma. For the first time in years, Leroy had options. He hesitated at first. After decades of being ignored, shoved aside, and surviving on scraps, it was hard to believe people suddenly cared. But Emma needed stability. And deep down, Leroy needed something too. They moved into a small transitional home, side by side in neighboring rooms. Emma had her own bed, her own pillow, and she wept the first night under warm blankets. Leroy wept, too, but silently, so she wouldn't see. The following days were quiet, but healing. Emma enrolled in school. She had trouble adjusting, her reading was years behind, and the other kids looked at her like she didn't belong. But she kept showing up. She kept trying. Leroy helped where he could. He walked her to school in the mornings, made sure she ate dinner at night. He learned how to fill out forms and navigate systems he never thought he'd use again. Then, one morning, Emma came home with a project. "Write about someone who changed your life." She handed Leroy her notebook and asked, shyly, "Can I write about you?" He nodded slowly, blinking back something heavy behind his eyes. "I reckon that'd be all right." Her essay was simple, childlike, but every word pierced like sunlight breaking through decades of dark. "Mr. Leroy gave me food when no one else would. He didn't know me, but he sat with me and listened. He didn't treat me like trash. He made me feel like I matter. I think maybe he saved me." He folded the paper carefully and kept it in his pocket. Read it at night when the old ghosts crept in. But peace doesn't come without disruption. A month later, a woman showed up at the shelter. She wore a sleek coat and heels that didn't belong on cracked sidewalks. Her face was sharp, hair too neat. She was Emma's biological aunt, her mother's estranged sister. "I saw the video," she said. "Saw all the attention she's getting. I think it's time I took her in." Leroy felt the chill in her voice. It wasn't love. It wasn't even guilt. It was greed or maybe ego. She saw headlines, not heartbeats. Emma stood behind him, small fingers clutching his sleeve. Her eyes darted between Leroy and the woman. "She doesn't even know me," Emma whispered. "She never came before, not even after my mom died." But the aunt had paperwork, legal rights, blood ties, and in a world built on rules, sometimes heart isn't enough. They took Emma that night. Leroy stood on the steps of the shelter, the paper bag in his hand growing cold, untouched. He had promised her dinner. Now he had no one to feed. The staff tried to comfort him. "She'll be okay," they said. "She's with family now." But Leroy knew better. He knew what family meant and what it didn't. 3 days passed, then 5, then 10. He went back to the diner alone. Carla didn't ask questions, just gave him coffee, quiet and free. Then one night 13 days later, there was a knock at the shelter's gate. It was past curfew. The security guard grumbled and shuffled to the door. It was Emma. Shoes torn, a bruise on her arm, tears staining her cheeks. "She hit me," she whispered, "and said I was lucky she didn't send me back to the streets. I ran. I didn't know where else to go." She collapsed into Leroy's arms, sobbing. And for the first time in decades, Leroy felt something like fury and love combined into something fierce, something unstoppable. He stood, tall despite his age, and made a decision. They were going to fight. With the help of a volunteer lawyer from the shelter, they filed for emergency guardianship. It was messy, complicated. The aunt protested, waved papers in court, claimed Emma was unstable, said Leroy was unfit. But the community rallied. Carla testified. The shelter director submitted records. The viral video was shown in court. So was Emma's essay. And in the end, the judge ruled what everyone already knew in their hearts. Emma belonged with Leroy. The two walked out of that courthouse hand in hand. No cameras. No fanfare. Just two souls weathered but undefeated. Their new home was small, just 2 rooms in an old apartment building. The heater rattled. The walls creaked. But they had a real stove. A real table. They ate together every night. Grilled cheese remained their favorite. Emma blossomed. She caught up in school, started drawing again sketches of the diner, the courthouse, of Leroy sitting on the stoop with his coffee. Leroy found work part-time at a community garden. He'd always loved growing things, even if life had spent years trying to bury him. One Saturday, Emma brought home a flyer from school. Talent show, it said. You gonna enter? Leroy asked, sipping tea. She nodded shyly. I want to sing, but only if you come watch. Leroy smiled, pride swelling in his chest. Wouldn't miss it for the world, baby girl. The night of the show, he wore his best shirt clean, slightly faded. Carla and others from the shelter came too. When Emma stepped on stage, she was nervous. But then she spotted him in the crowd. And she sang. A simple song. One about home, not the kind made of walls, but the kind made of people. The whole room stood when she finished. And Leroy, sitting in the front row, wept openly. Not because of the song, but because once, long ago, a hungry girl sat in the shadows. And all he gave her was a sandwich. Now, she was giving him back the whole world. Weeks passed after the talent show, and Emma's song still echoed in Leroy's chest. It wasn't just a performance, it was a declaration. That they had made it. That they had turned pain into something beautiful. The local paper ran a short piece with the headline, Former homeless girl brings crowd to tears with tribute to her guardian. Leroy didn't like being called a guardian. I'm just a man who refused to look away, he told the reporter. But even he couldn't deny what they had become family. Emma started getting invitations. A charity organization that supported displaced children asked her to speak. A nonprofit art center offered her free drawing classes. And Leroy? He became something of a legend in the neighborhood. People waved when they saw him on the street now. They dropped off bags of food, left thank you notes, offered rides. Once, a man in a suit stopped him outside the garden and said, You reminded me what decency looks like. Leroy chuckled. Wasn't trying to remind nobody, just feeding a child. But not all changes come easy. One night, as fall began to roll in again and the chill returned to the air, Leroy woke coughing hard. His chest tightened, and the room spun. Emma ran to him, panic flooding her young face. I'm okay, he wheezed. Just a cold. But it wasn't just a cold. At the clinic, they said pneumonia. They wanted to keep him for a few days, but Leroy insisted on going home. He didn't like hospitals. Too many memories of watching people not come back. Emma took care of him, made soup, heated towels, sat by his side reading from the books she'd once been too scared to touch. But Leroy's body, worn by decades on the street and years of hunger, took longer to bounce back. One morning, as sunlight crept in through the broken blinds, Leroy looked at her and said, If something happens to me. Don't, she interrupted. Don't talk like that. But he went on, voice gentle. If something does, I want you to remember this. None of this was luck. You're not here because someone rescued you. You're here because you were brave enough to let someone in. That was you, Emma. That strength? It's yours. Tears gathered in her eyes. But I wouldn't be here without you. He smiled, tired. And I wouldn't still be breathing if not for you. He recovered slowly, but it changed them. Reminded them that life was fragile, precious. Every day mattered. So they lived louder. They started a Saturday tradition, pancakes, then a walk through the park. Leroy told stories from his youth. About the music scene in Harlem in the 70s. About how he once danced with a girl so beautiful it made his knees weak. About the day he lost his job, and how that single moment had unraveled his life. Emma listened like each word was gold. In return, she showed him her sketchbook. Page after page of drawings of him, of the diner, of the first sandwich. One page had the words, He saw me. That fall, Emma entered her school's art competition. She drew a portrait of Leroy sitting on their old curb, holding a sandwich out to a faceless child in the dark. The judges cried. She won first prize. But she didn't keep the ribbon. She pinned it on Leroy's wall, right above his bed. It's yours, she said. The same week, a journalist reached out from a national magazine. They wanted to do a feature. How one act of kindness saved 2 lives. Leroy hesitated. Ain't looking for attention. But Emma placed a hand on his. It's not for you. It's for every kid still hiding behind a dumpster, and every man who thinks he's too broken to matter. He agreed. The article was published with a full spread. Their photo Leroy in his garden clothes. Emma beside him with charcoal on her hands captured something raw and unfiltered. Letters poured in. From children, from widows, from teachers and pastors and strangers who had felt invisible. Some sent donations. Others just sent stories. One letter, from a man in Iowa, said, "Your story made me stop my car and give a sandwich to a kid who looked just like Emma. I never would have noticed him before. Thank you." Another, "I hadn't spoken to my father in 10 years. I called him after reading about you." Leroy read each one carefully, sometimes twice. He didn't reply. He didn't have to. Just knowing it meant something that someone else might be a little softer, a little braver was enough. Then, a surprise came in the mail, an invitation. The city council wanted to honor him at the mayor's annual community gala, a formal event. Suits and speeches and bright lights. Leroy nearly laughed. "They know I own one pair of shoes and they got holes." Carla stepped in, took him shopping, bought him a suit. "Black," she said. "You'll look like the king you are." Emma helped him tie the tie. He grumbled, but secretly, he enjoyed every moment. At the gala, when Leroy walked on stage, the entire room stood. The mayor handed him a plaque. "For compassion that changed a city." Leroy cleared his throat at the mic. "I ain't never had a plaque before," he said. The room chuckled. Then he turned serious. "I spent most of my life invisible. People crossed the street to avoid me. I ate out of trash bins, slept in doorways. I thought I'd die forgotten. But then one night, I saw a girl colder and hungrier than me, and I remembered what it was like to be small and scared. So I gave her dinner." He paused. "And she gave me back my life." The room fell silent. No one moved. Then the applause erupted. Not polite, not formal. It was thunderous, raw, real. That night, Leroy and Emma danced. Just once. Slow, clumsy, joyful. A memory they would both hold close forever. But not every chapter ends in light. That winter, Leroy's cough returned. This time worse. And the test came back with news no one wanted: late-stage lung disease. Years of cold and damp and untreated illness had done their work. Emma sat beside him in the hospital, refusing to leave. "I'm not ready," she whispered. Leroy smiled, weak but full of peace. "Baby girl, you were never supposed to be ready. You were supposed to grow, to become." She laid her head on his chest. "I don't want to say goodbye. You won't have to. I'll be with you, in the art, in the stories, in the way you hold someone else's hand when they're scared." His last words were simple. Keep feeding people. Emma stayed by Leroy's side every single day in the hospital. She brought her sketchbook and drew him sleeping, drew the light falling across his frail hands, and sometimes just held his hand in silence. Nurses came and went, quietly respectful. Everyone in the ward seemed to know their story. One nurse, Maria, brought in fresh flowers each morning. "He's special," she said softly. "He reminds me why I do this." Leroy grew weaker, but his spirit stayed steady. He'd ask Emma about her drawings, about school, about the kids she sat with at lunch. "You still sitting with that new girl? The shy one?" Emma nodded. "I told her what you told me, that sometimes people who seem invisible just need someone to sit beside them." Leroy smiled. "That's my girl." The community rallied again. The diner sent warm meals. Carla visited often, always bringing small comforts: a blanket, a crossword, a picture of Leroy from the old days. The mayor sent a letter. Kids from Emma's school made cards. One boy wrote, "Thank you for seeing her when the world didn't." And then one morning, Leroy slipped into sleep and didn't wake up. It was peaceful. No pain, no gasping or struggle, just a long, soft breath and stillness. Emma sat there for hours after he was gone, curled beside him like she had that first night on the curb. Her grief was silent and deep, but so was her gratitude. When they held the memorial, it was standing room only. People from every corner of the city came: doctors, bus drivers, janitors, teachers, news anchors, even children. Carla stood up to speak, her voice thick with tears. "He came in here with 2 crumpled dollars and left with a whole city in his heart." Then Emma walked to the podium. She held her sketchbook in one hand, the first sandwich drawing framed in the other. "When I had no thing, no name, no family, no hope, he sat down beside me. He fed me not just food, but dignity. He made me believe I was worth saving, and I will spend the rest of my life proving him right." She held up the drawing. This is where we met. This is where everything changed. And then she said what he once told her. Keep feeding people. After the memorial, Emma didn't return to the shelter. She stayed in the small apartment they had shared. Social services offered to place her with a foster family, but an older woman MS. June, from the community garden, stepped in. I knew Leroy, she said. We grew beans and tomatoes together, side by side. That girl is family now. Emma became her legal ward 2 months later. But she was never just another kid in the system. She was the girl who had been fed by a man with nothing. The girl who sang her way into the city's heart. The girl who drew kindness and grief and redemption on every page. She graduated high school 2 years later with honors. And when she gave her valedictorian speech, she didn't talk about academic success or test scores. She talked about sidewalks and sandwiches. About how a single act of compassion can ripple further than any of us can imagine. She said, my father wasn't born to me. He found me, and I found him. And I carry his legacy in everything I do. Emma went on to study art and social work. She opened a center downtown, the Leroy House, a safe space for homeless youth. Inside, there were walls covered with art. Free meals every evening. Quiet beds for anyone who needed rest. Showers. Books. Laughter. Above the front desk was a sign, painted by Emma herself. Everyone deserves to be seen. On the 5th anniversary of Leroy's passing, Emma returned to the curb behind Marley's diner. She sat in the same spot they once shared, grilled cheese in hand, and waited. A boy, small, dirty, no older than she had once been, appeared across the street. Scared, hunched, watching. She smiled gently and held out the sandwich. You eaten tonight, baby boy? He didn't speak, but he stepped closer. And that was how it began again. Not with cameras or headlines, but with one sandwich and a heart big enough to change the world. Years passed. The city changed, like cities always do. New buildings, new faces, new tragedies, new miracles. But one thing stayed constant: the legend of Leroy and the girl he fed. At the Leroy house, Emma, now in her mid-20s, walked the halls each morning, greeting the kids by name. She remembered what it felt like to be invisible, so she made sure no one under her roof ever felt that way. She had a photo of Leroy above her desk. He was laughing in it, the kind of laugh that shook his shoulders and made people believe joy was still possible. She'd captured it one day when he dropped a tomato in the garden and pretended it had slipped because it was trying to escape harvest. It was her favorite memory. One evening, just as the sun dipped low and painted the sidewalks gold, a young boy named Ty came into the center. He was 12, rail-thin, and carried nothing but a backpack full of old candy wrappers. Emma saw the way he clutched it like it held his whole life. She greeted him like she always did, with warmth and a grilled cheese sandwich. Ty didn't speak for the first 3 days, but he stayed, slept in the same room Emma once had. On the 4th day, he whispered, "Thank you." That was all it took. Emma sat with him every day after that. He started drawing. And like her, he drew pain. He drew fire, fists, alleys, and rain. But slowly, his drawings began to shift. A hand reaching out. A bed. A door being opened. One day, he handed her a picture. It was of a man with kind eyes and an old coat, handing food to a small child. "Is that?" she asked softly. Ty nodded. "That's your dad, right?" Emma choked back tears. "Yeah, that's him." The stories about Leroy had spread through the center. Kids talked about him like a myth, part truth, part legend. But Emma always made sure they knew the full version. He wasn't a saint, just a man. Tired, lonely, and still kind. She told them what he taught her. That compassion doesn't need permission. That we're all more than what life has taken from us. That sometimes, feeding one person is enough to feed the world. Emma kept sketching. She had her first gallery showing at 27 sidewalk saints, portraits of the homeless, the helpers, and the forgotten. Each piece told a story. One man in a wheelchair offering his blanket. A mother sharing soup with 3 strangers. A girl sleeping in a shelter with a crumpled drawing under her pillow. Her most talked about piece was called "The First Sandwich." People stood for long minutes in front of it. Some cried. Some donated. One man whispered, "I haven't spoken to my brother in 15 years. Maybe it's time." Her art didn't make her rich, but it made people feel. And that was enough. On the 10th anniversary of Leroy's passing, the city named the alley behind Marley's diner Leroy Lane. There was a ceremony. Not grand, just heartfelt. Carla stood beside Emma. So did Ms. June, now walking with a cane, but eyes still sharp. A new mural covered the wall. Leroy holding out a sandwich, smiling. Beside him, a young Emma sat cross-legged, eyes full of wonder and hunger and hope. A plaque read, "He gave her food. She gave him purpose. Together, they gave us back our humanity." Emma spoke briefly. "People ask me all the time, why a sandwich? Why not money, or shelter, or clothes?" But that sandwich wasn't just food. It was safety, warmth, a message that said, "I see you. You matter." That's all I needed to start healing. And if we each give someone just a little warmth, a little dignity, we might just save more lives than we ever know. After the event, Emma stayed behind. She sat on the curb, exactly where she had once sat as a frightened child, and laid a sandwich on a paper napkin at the base of the mural. She whispered, "Still feeding them, Leroy." A wind swept past. Not cold, not harsh, just enough to stir her curls and make the leaves rustle like quiet applause. Later that year, she published a book, The Man Who Fed Me. It was part memoir, part art collection, part tribute. It won awards, got translated into other languages, was handed out in shelters, schools, prisons, even churches. One teacher wrote to her, "My students have never been so quiet as when I read your story aloud." One FEMA boy who never speaks came to me after and asked if we could hand out food at the local shelter. That's what you've done. You've made silence listen. But Emma didn't write it for acclaim. She wrote it because stories like Leroy's don't belong in whispers. They belong in the light. She started a second shelter a year later in another city. She called it Second Sandwich. The motto, one meal, one heart. She hired former homeless youth, gave them dignity, trust, belief. One FEMA girl named Marisol once asked her, "How do you keep giving, even when the world's so heavy?" Emma smiled, remembering a tired man with cracked hands and tired eyes. "Because someone gave to me, and I promised I'd keep feeding people." On what would have been Leroy's 80th birthday, Emma returned to his old garden plot. It had long since grown wild, but she cleared it, replanted. Tomatoes, beans, herbs just like he'd taught her. A small sign stuck into the soil read, "Still growing." And beside it, a little boy no taller, stronger, standing with a watering can and asking, "Is this where it all started?" Emma looked at him, at the sun warming the earth, at the leaves reaching up toward the sky. "No," she said gently. "It started on a sidewalk, with nothing but hunger and hope." She bent down, her fingers in the dirt. "But this is where we keep it going." And as they worked the soil together, shoulder to shoulder, the wind carried the smell of fresh basil and the echo of laughter, Leroy's laughter alive in every seed, every sandwich, every soul fed by the quiet, unstoppable power of kindness. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight. Cold, steady, unforgiving. The kind of rain that soaked through shoes and made every breath sting. People rushed through the sidewalks with umbrellas and earbuds, heads down, hurrying past stories they didn't want to see. But Malik stood still. He was 17, thin, wiry. His coat was 2 sizes too big, the zipper broken. He hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, a granola bar he found near a trash bin behind the gas station. He didn't want handouts. He wasn't like them, the ones sprawled on benches or yelling at ghosts. He was just stuck, alone, not broken, just on pause. At least, that's what he told himself. Then he saw the mural. He had wandered into the alley behind a diner, looking for a dry corner to sit for a while. What he found instead stopped him cold. A painted wall. A man in a long coat, kind eyes, offering a sandwich to a child. And beside them, a line of words in black paint. He gave her food. She gave him purpose. Together, they gave us back our humanity. Malik stared at it, unmoving. The mural looked like someone had poured warmth right onto the bricks. The girl in the picture looked like someone who had been scared once just like him, but wasn't anymore. And that man, he looked like someone who saw things that other people didn't. Malik didn't know why, but he sank down beside the wall. It felt safe there. The city noise faded. Even the rain seemed softer under the mural's gaze. That's where the woman found him. She walked softly, wore a red scarf, and carried a brown paper bag. "Hey," she said gently. He tensed. "I'm not here to bother you. Just I come here sometimes. To remember someone." He had the bag. "I'm not begging." She smiled. "Good. Because I'm not giving. I'm sharing." She sat beside him, opened the bag, and handed him half of a grilled cheese sandwich. Still warm. He stared. Why? She looked at the mural. Because someone once shared a sandwich with me, and it changed everything. He didn't respond, but he took the sandwich. They sat in silence, chewing, the sound of the rain like background music. Your name? She asked. Malik. I'm Emma. He froze, looked at the wall, then back at her. You're the girl? She nodded slowly. That man saved my life. And now, I try to pass it on when I can. He didn't know what to say. No one had talked to him like this in weeks. Months, maybe. Not without suspicion or pity. She wasn't looking down at him. She was just with him. Where do you live? She asked, careful not to press too hard. He shrugged. Nowhere. Do you want somewhere? Another pause. The longest. Finally, he nodded. Emma stood. Come with me. He hesitated, but something in her voice, the way she didn't ask, but also didn't demand, made him rise. They walked together through the rain, past corners he knew too well, past benches and soup lines, past the people who blended into the gray. And then the Leroy house. It didn't look like much from the outside, just another brick building. But the moment he stepped through the door, warmth hit him like sunlight. A girl with braids handed him a towel. A boy offered socks. Someone said, "Hey, welcome." And on the wall paintings. Everywhere. Faces. Sidewalks. Laughter. Hope. He stood there, overwhelmed. Emma touched his shoulder. This was his dream. Not a shelter. A home. That night, Malik slept in a real bed. He showered for the first time in weeks. Ate food that didn't come in plastic wrappers. He didn't say much. Just stared at the ceiling, heart pounding. The next morning, there was a drawing pad on the table. A pencil beside it. He picked it up, unsure why. And slowly, his hands began to move. 6 months later, Malik was still at the Leroy house, but he wasn't just living there anymore. He was teaching art therapy sessions every Thursday for the younger kids. He didn't call it that, of course, just called it drawing stuff. But Emma knew what it really was, healing with lines and color. His first finished piece? A recreation of the mural. But this time, he added a new figure. A boy himself sitting beside the man and the girl. Not taking a sandwich, but offering one. When he showed Emma, she cried. He panicked. Is it bad? She shook her head. It's perfect. He entered it into a citywide youth art competition. It won. The prize? A full scholarship to the community college's art program. He stared at the envelope for a long time when it arrived. I don't deserve this, he whispered. Emma placed a hand on his shoulder. Leroy would have told you. We never deserve kindness. But we pass it on anyway. Malik didn't have parents. Didn't have roots. But for the first time, he had purpose. And one day, as he stood outside the Leroy house after class, a little girl approached him. Ragged hoodie. Mismatched shoes. Scared eyes. He didn't speak. Just opened his backpack, took out half a sandwich, and held it out. She stared at it. Then took it. He sat beside her. I'm Malik. You eaten today? She shook her head. Well, he smiled. You're in luck. She didn't ask why he was helping her. But if she had, he might have said. Because once, someone saw a scared kid behind a diner and gave her half a sandwich. And it changed everything.